Welcome to the finale of 25 the Hard Way, F My Life. Now we've got a lot to discuss today and a lot of material to get through, so let's dive right in at the beginning with the visual novel. F A Fairy Tale of the Two is shameless porn. What, that's not good enough? Okay, fine. F A Fairy Tale of the Two ultimately has a very simple premise. It explores the disparate impact that a tragic event has on two people. However, it goes about this in a very unorthodox way by telling the stories of the people whose lives intersected with those affected by said tragedy. In the first tale, we follow Yuko, who has been resurrected as an angelic being to have one final moment with Himura. On this way to their last meeting, she first crosses paths with Hiro Hirono and Miyako Miyamura. In the VN, she interacts with the two of them a lot. She gives them lots of advice and helps their relationship avoid disaster and ultimately succeed. She does the same with Kei Shindo, helping her to get over Hiro and move forward with Kyosuke. However, while she does this, she avoids telling them exactly what to do. She pokes and prods them toward being responsible individuals and doing the hard things that will make them better people. It comes off as someone who is desperate to prevent people from becoming like her, but she knows she can't overstep her bounds and ultimately finds the right way to help them earn happiness through her refusal to give up on hope. And by happiness, I of course mean overtly pornographic sex. Because that's what true happiness is, right? Obviously, I can't show you these scenes in their full frontal spank material glory, but from a storytelling standpoint, the only one that accomplishes anything is the first scene with Kyosuke and Kei, who runs out because she's not ready yet. Other than that, they're nothing more than porn. And like I said earlier, when 4chan made a game that utilizes sex scenes for better story progression, a professionally produced, mass consumption visual novel has no excuse. Especially considering all the empty space and boredom you have to dredge through just to get those invisible dick pics and jailbait boobs. Worth it? Speaking of empty space, the biggest problem in the visual novel is its storytelling. Hiro and Miyako's story, which is genuinely interesting, doesn't have much, if any, drama. Sure, Kei says she's going to destroy Miyako's life, but if you're trying to get the good ending and actually advance in the game, that never happens. What we're left with is the blossoming relationship between Hiro and Miyako, and for what it is, it's built very realistically and ends up being very believable. However, the same cannot be said for Kyosuke and Kei.
Just like we've seen 100,000 times already, we began filming again. Everything was back to normal, like nothing else has happened in this story. I'm bored out of my fucking mind.
The entire thing is Kyosuke filming Kei in profile and them walking around. Then, eventually, Kei decides to bang him for reasons. Kyosuke does come off as a good guy, but there's a difference between a guy you can relate to and a bland white meat babyface. Still, in the grand scheme of things, the point is Yuko's influence and aid in making the two happy. And in that area, it succeeds considering that aside from her say-so, there was no reason for them to come together. Then, with the happy endings firmly out of the way, Himura takes center stage to talk about his life experiences. The latter tale begins with the story of Renji and Chihiro, which, as I've explained throughout the show, plays out very differently. Ultimately, the point of it is that there is no happy ending. The ending informs Himura's far more pessimistic take on life, and that's the wrinkle of the game's second half. Himura is the polar opposite of Yuko. Since he never got over her death, he's become a very bitter, pessimistic person, and despite his best efforts to help those who come to him, nothing ends well. This hits a very low point with Kuze's violation of Mizuki, which comes off as something that could only happen in the life of Himura as someone who has surrounded himself with bitter, betrayed people. His departure to run away from his grief and the dual settings of the show also aid the two's contrasting opinions by giving the necessary separation for their disparate viewpoints to develop. Without that, it might seem far more contrived and arbitrary by constantly raising the question of how the two never managed to run into one another. Finally, at the end, we're given the background for Yuko and Himura's relationship, and to the visual novel's credit, it isn't terrible. The most important point that makes it unhateable for me is that Yuko doesn't try to destroy Himura's life for what happened to her. He comes to love her far more naturally, and because his feelings come off as legitimate, when he ultimately declares his love for Yuko despite what happened to her, Yuko can't hate him anymore. I mean, sure, she tries to flee from him because it's an outcome she didn't expect, but she ultimately commits to him. Instead of some grand conspiracy to devastate Himura beyond repair, it's an effort to reveal to Himura what happened to her to attest his alleged dedication. And guess what? It's because of Himura's unflinching dedication to Yuko that she ultimately can't help but give in to her feelings. He has conviction. He knows what he wants. He knows how he feels. Man, what a novel concept. Oh, look at that, a pun. Basically, the visual novel's kind of a mixed bag. The latter tale is much better than A Tale of Melodies, but Mizuki's also 15 years old, so that's much worse. Now, the first tale isn't as offensive as its sequel, but it's also much more boring and plain, so it doesn't really have that much of an edge. Now, in the grand scope of things, Yuko and Himura's story does feel very satisfying and well told, so at the very least, Minori did accomplish telling one story very, very well. So, on the whole, with all things considered, I'd probably give F a Fairy Tale the 2, about a B-, maybe it's C+. Now then, back to the anime. As an adaptation, F fails in every way aside from naming the characters properly. A Tale of Memories can't even manage to establish its two different settings properly, and that's only the beginning. For example, did you know Renji has a dad? Yeah, I mean, he's away for work a lot, but he exists, although you never know that from watching this series. They couldn't be bothered to establish a main character's parents. And it does everything it can to make every one of those characters unlikable, at the very least. Any storytelling that could have been accomplished is prevented by the blunt force trauma dialogue and obtuse pretentious art style that bleeds over into Kyosuke and pulls all attention away from anything that quote-unquote matters. And matters deserves heavy quotation marks because the natural, realistic storytelling of the VN that actually mattered is supplanted by overwrought, crap talk melodrama. It's this inexplicable obsession with hyperbole that single-handedly destroys the characters. Kei becomes a mustache-twirling, despicable villain, even though, by the end, the show clearly wants us to feel sorry for her. Hiro comes off as an irresponsible, indifferent jackass with no ability to understand how humans behave, rendering him stupid beyond reason. Miyako is a bipolar lunatic. That's it. And don't even get me started on Renji and Chihiro. I think I've already said enough about them. They suck, and their contrived plot-hole-ridden BS ending makes me angry because of how it ruins the justification for Himura's angsty, pessimistic attitude. Kuze is a complete asshole that the show desperately tries to redeem at the end by overemphasizing how much Mizuki loves him and gilding him with a sudden refusal to die. Well, guess what? It still fails! Mizuki is a naive idiot high school freshman who has no inkling of an adult perspective on life, but the show ultimately demands that we take her seriously and endorses her ludicrous love for Kuze in an even more desperate attempt to contrive another misguided happy ending. And yeah, we just did Himura's story in vivid detail, so I'm not going to go over that again, but I will remind everyone that it fails in shocking fashion by managing to turn Yuko, the most sympathetic character in the entire grand cinematic scope, into a mustache-twirling villain as well. It ruins Himura by converting him into a spineless coward who can't bring himself to do absolutely anything to actively save or protect Yuko. The only reason the two end up together is because they fail upward and get lucky when Amamiya suddenly decides to kill himself in a fire. What? So, given all these facts, are F A Tale of Memories and F A Tale of Melodies really the worst adaptation of all time? Well, that's a really subjective question. I could argue for very objective reasons why a show is terrible or even the worst of all time. I can do the same thing for why an anime is the best of all time. However, your mileage will more dramatically vary by how offended you are by a given adaptation. Fans of Umineku no Naku Koro ni were outraged over what they saw as a total failure to adapt the show in anime form. Is that the worst adaptation of all time? Well, I'm sure it is to many people. I was extremely offended by the fifth Harry Potter film, but a lot of people weren't. The Hobbit movies are an embarrassment of bad filmmaking and even worse as adaptations to a lot of people. But are they the worst ever? Who knows? All these examples certainly do a terrible job of presenting their source material, but they're also based on something that has a presumed high quality to begin with. F A Fairy Tale of the Two is no heavyweight, but the majority of my offense comes from how bad the adaptation is on its own. It's a terrible series, conclusively, and it utterly fails to understand what it should have inherited from the source material while simultaneously replacing the best things with bafflingly terrible new things. But F certainly wasn't a 10 to begin with, and if the anime gets an F, that's really not all that much further down from a C+, now is it? So, what can be said about it? For me, it might be even worse than Code Geass R2. I mean, yeah, I know I argued that that was the worst of all time or whatever, but that was more of an academic attempt to see if I could actually argue the point. I have never been as profoundly offended as I have with F. Sure, other series are more disappointing, and sure, other series might suck more, but I have never failed to understand more thoroughly how so many people could make so many bad decisions. And it's because of my fundamental failure to understand how the human intellect could produce such a thorough abomination that I hate it, even more so than all of the legitimate complaints that I've made the entire way along. So for that reason, because it's so personal for me, I can't objectively say that this is the worst adaptation of all time or even the worst anime adaptation of all time. It's just really a total betrayal of an okay at best visual novel. So, if there's an anime adaptation that made you pull your hair out, cry, or maybe shit out of sheer rage, leave a comment below and tell us about it. And if there's an anime adaptation that everybody has to see because of how much you love it and how great it is, leave a comment about that as well. And if you still want to talk about how much you like F, I guess that's a thing you can do, even if you're wrong. But anyway, this has been 25 the Hard Way. I'm Will Ryan. Ugh. What? No. No, no, no! We're doomed.